No Rest for the Wicked is a brand new ARPG from Moon Studios. It blends elements of Western ARPGs like randomized loot from Diablo with elements of Eastern ARPGs like the difficulty and world building of a game like Dark Souls. And overall, this is a match made in heaven. So you can think of No Rest for the Wicked as an isometric Souls-like ARPG. I finished all of the content for the game's first act in under 15 hours. I think it was actually closer to 10, but I then kept playing for another 35, making my total over 50. Because as it turns out, there's a lot to do here. There's a lot to explore, there's a lot of builds to try, and man, they did a good job with this game. Now for full disclosure, I did receive a key from Private Division. However, I'm able to say whatever I want about the game, both positive and negative, and don't worry, I'm going to be saying quite a bit of both. And to be completely honest with you, because I'm such a huge fan of everything Moon Studios does, I was absolutely going to buy the game regardless. I also plan to keep up with No Rest for the Wicked throughout early access and continued development, so do be sure to get subscribed, that way you won't miss future updates. For now, let's get into talking about what early access is right now and some of my experiences playing. The game opens on troubled times. An ancient plague has returned, a plague that doesn't just kill or maim, but twists its victims into monsters, creating beings known as the Tauren. You're headed to the Isle of Sakra. You've been called in to deal with these monstrosities, because you're a Cerim. Now, there's no Rivian accent, but I definitely felt a heavy inspiration from Witcher here. After all, you're a supernaturally powerful warrior who's able to fight monsters by wielding weapons and runes. It's not quite the same, and there doesn't seem to be nearly as much womanizing, but there are definitely some similarities. These days, I'm pretty tired of the old trope of a chosen one or child of destiny, so it's refreshing to just be some nameless near-nobody who happens to be really good at killing monsters. You're attacked in transit, your ship is dashed upon the rocks, and you wash up on the shores of Sakra. Which is a very bad thing, as those shores are now crawling with risen, plus there's probably a Tauren or two around. You need to find a weapon quickly. Luckily nearby, there's a very unfortunate fellow whose weapon didn't protect him. Maybe it'll serve you a little bit better. So you grab the weapon and get to exploring the prologue area. You can think of this as an extended tutorial that's going to teach you what you need to know about the game's basics. How to fight enemies, some of their patterns, what a boss battle looks like, cooking food and using it to restore your health, all the stuff the tutorial already kind of taught you that you now get to put into practice, which is really refreshing. Because it's super unfortunate when a game introduces a system, gives you a tutorial on it, and then just tells you, alright, don't worry, in 4 hours or 5 hours you'll need this, because in 4 or 5 hours, I'm not going to remember the tutorial. I'm going to forget it. And so putting everything you learn into practice, along with introducing the game's difficulty front and center, is absolutely the way to go here. Something else that's quite refreshing is the way the game utilizes its voice acting. For example, here's a short clip from early on in the game after you've reached the city of Sacrament.
Never wanted to see him like that. You hacked your way to our gates without a moment's thought. Our hero, everyone! Our hero has come! Butchering their way through what's left of our friends, our family, our children. He was a man. They all were.
This isn't some major quest giver. No, this is some random lady on the street side that you don't have to talk to at all. The only reason I did is she said something that stood out to me. So I spoke to her. And this is one of but several conversations I had throughout my time with seemingly random, insignificant NPCs that turned out to be interesting and helped to build up the world. This approach shows the level of care and craft that's been put into the world, into the city of Sacrament, and into the island itself. Because these aren't the big set pieces, the parts that you're supposed to see anyway. These are small little Easter eggs, things that you come across because you've explored, things that you find out because you talk to an NPC, things which paint the world as alive and something to care about, something worth saving. Not that the game slacks off when it comes to introducing major NPCs either. Shortly after you beat the prologue and reach the city of Sacrament, this is how the game introduces you to Madrigal Celine of the Inquisition.
God's reach. They're already here.
Governor Ellsworth.
Madrigal Celine, I apologize for the lack of a formal welcome. If you sent word, it must have been lost.
A welcome sight, though, aren't they? About time Phelan sent reinforcements.
My Inquisition is here as an act of mercy, Baron Winnick. There is an unholy presence on this island. I have come on behalf of King Magnus, who sent me...
King Magnus? The boy.
Forgive me. I thought you had heard. Your brother, the king, has passed.
How long?
It will be a week tomorrow. You should return to Phelan, Governor. Your nephew has extended his hand. He invites you to rejoin the family.
Thank you, Madrigal. But Sacra is my home.
Sacra will be in capable hands. My Inquisition have quartered ourselves in Fort Reach, and will remain for as long as it takes to heal this island.
Fort Reach? Sacrament's a bit out of your way then, isn't it?
My outfit encountered a group of raiders as we came ashore on your coast. We sent all of them to rejoin God, save one. I thought she might be of particular interest to you. We could have left her body by the side of the road with the other animals. Consider this an offering of goodwill from the church.
Where was the touch when our people were sick and starving? We're done begging for scraps. We take what we need.
Odessa. Don't.
Leave her. I'm sure the governor can properly discipline his own daughter. At least as well as he governs his city.
My apologies, Madrigal. She does not stand for sacrament.
Damn right I don't.
Guards, take her away.
This way, Rhythm. I should have never taught you that little move.
You will arrange an escort for my vanguard to Kalen.
Kalen? It will be done. Is there anything else we can do?
You can rejoice, Governor. Your salvation is at hand.
I certainly wouldn't describe Madrigal Celine as a friend, but she's also not necessarily going to be your enemy. She's powerful, and her Inquisition are clearly fervently loyal to her. And yet, despite them being fanatics, they do show some restraint, at least when she orders it. She spares Ellsworth's daughter Odessa, but is this a kindness, an act of mercy, or simply a means to control him? To find out more about the story, you're going to have to play the game for yourself and experience all the cutscenes in full. Now, combat is one aspect that is far more Souls than Diablo. And at first, I thought the combat was a little bit of an acquired taste. I felt like I was constantly out of stamina, and the repair costs on death felt genuinely punishing. But then I ended up putting the game down for a couple days for completely unrelated reasons. And over that time, there were a couple of hotfixes, which ended up rebalancing stamina costs and lowering repair costs. And after that, combat felt absolutely wonderful. Don't get me wrong, it's still hard, and you're going to die a lot. But it provides a sense of mastery, of working up where first an enemy is terrifying, and then you know a little bit about their moveset. You know you can dodge, and sometimes you get hit in the face. And then you learn a little bit more, and you feel super comfortable going into most of the fights. You learn how to deal with each foe, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, and the attack that you can actually parry. Where most ARPGs fail to deliver meaningful combat, No Rest for the Wicked absolutely succeeds. There's many ways in which No Rest for the Wicked is similar to Souls games. For example, it has a classless system. In other words, you don't start as a paladin or a berserker. You start as a Cerim. Then you can invest points into strength. You can invest points into faith. This defines which weapons you get to equip, thus your build. Your carry weight determines your armor class. Lighter armor means you dodge faster. Heavier armor means you dodge slower. In terms of dealing damage, you've got a light attack and a heavy attack. The heavy attack can be charged up for even more damage, at least on most weapons. And each weapon has a rune. Unleashing a rune requires focus. Think of this as unleashing weapon arts from Souls games. When you do so, you gain a powerful special move. This can be a spell that deals damage from a distance, a buff on yourself, or simply a charge attack that allows you to introduce an enemy's face to the ground. And of course, throughout all of this, you're going to be spending stamina. You spend stamina to dodge, you spend stamina to parry, you spend stamina to block, and you spend stamina to attack. And if you run out of stamina, you will be a sitting duck. This is what makes the combat feel weighty and tactical without it feeling oppressive the way it would if you had to just constantly chug mana potions. But there are a few key differences between combat in No Rest for the Wicked and how it plays out in practice, especially how it interacts with the world itself in combat in a game like Dark Souls or Elden Ring. So the first major point of difference is what happens on death. If you die in No Rest for the Wicked, you don't lose any experience. It's not like Dark Souls where you drop your souls and have to go back and collect them. However, your equipment does take durability damage, which you'll need to repair, and if you don't repair it, the equipment ends up breaking and becoming useless, again at least until it's repaired. So, in Dark Souls, there's no punishment for your first death. Your only punishment is for either A, dropping your souls in a place you can't recover them, or B, dying twice. Which also means there's a very strong incentive to go back to the place you died to try to get those souls. In No Rest for the Wicked, you do still spawn back at the nearest Cerim Whisper that you attuned to, but your equipment has already taken damage. There's no explicit need to go back to where you died. You're perfectly free to say, all right, that area was a little too hard. I'm going to go elsewhere for now and explore something different. Whereas Dark Souls encourages you to keep exploring the same area, to learn from your mistakes, No Rest for the Wicked encourages you to explore different areas. Now, the second very major difference. When you rest at a bonfire in Dark Souls, all the enemies in the area are respawned and your Estus flasks are refilled. When you attune yourself to a Cerim Whisper, it's simply a respawn point and can be used to teleport back to the city of Sacrament. Enemies in the area do not respawn. And also your healing isn't restored, because your healing is done via food, not Estus, which is a bit of a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, it means you can stack up as much food as you want, and as you continue to progress through the game and discover new recipes and make better food, your healing effects do become stronger, similar to upgrading an Estus flask. But the downside of this is it creates a bit of a reinforcement loop. When you're winning, you get tons of extra food drops from enemies, and you're able to completely sustain it without spending any resources. But if you're dying a lot, if you're losing, and if you're eating a lot of food, you find yourself spending more and more time farming to get food to keep up with the fact that you keep taking damage, thus needing to eat more food. In general, I'm not a big fan of win more systems, especially when you can take 60 food into a boss fight and completely trivialize it as long as you have enough health and other defenses that the boss can't kill you in a couple of hits. So I'd much rather see some tweaks here, where you can take a certain amount of food into a fight, but anything beyond that isn't really useful, and maybe getting some sort of easier access to low-level food, that way you have a consistent source of healing without needing regeneration or gain on hit gear. Basically, I'm saying the top end should probably be nerfed a little bit, and the bottom end should be buffed a little bit, because right now it feels bad when you're failing consistently and fall into that negative reinforcement loop. But then the build crafting incorporates the randomization used by Western ARPGs to keep people playing. In other words, a lot of the items that you get have fully randomized stats. When you obtain a weapon or an armor piece, you can think of this as a base. The armor has certain implicit properties like its weight that do not change unless modified by a stat. Weapons have animations and a starting rune that again do not change, but there's a lot of room for customization. Because, for example, you can turn an item from the normal white state to either blue, which is a rare item, or purple, which is a cursed item. This adds additional stats, and in the case of cursed items, also adds negative modifiers. Occasionally, you'll also find uniques if you defeat a boss, but those are more of signature weapons. And so this means you don't necessarily have your best in slot weapon just because one dropped. You might need to drop 2 or 3 more, you might need to drop 10 more to get those perfect rolls. Furthermore, you get to enhance this over at the enchanter. If you get a white item, you can enchant it up, that'll make it blue or purple. You can infuse gems into it to increase the damage, you can upgrade it at the blacksmith. There's a lot of extra steps to build crafting here, done via relatively accessible resources which you get to farm. And so throughout my playtime, I constantly felt like I was making small improvements to my character. It's not like I obtained the best in slot armor set and then I was suddenly good to go. This makes the progression feel a lot more dynamic than I've experienced in a lot of other Souls games. Now, when it came to bosses, I didn't find them to be too difficult, especially relative to other Souls games that I've played. In part because I was probably a bit overleveled for the fights since I spent so much time exploring, and in part because they telegraph it very well, I was able to dodge bosses pretty easily, which resulted in me beating most of them in 1 or 2 goes. However, that does not mean I didn't die a lot. I very much did die a lot. It was just usually to normal enemies. Because while I could parry a very widely telegraphed boss swing, I could only occasionally parry normal enemies, like this guy. He killed me like 12 times, which I'm pretty sure was more than the Riven twins, before I finally figured out, okay, this is how I parry him, this is how much I can lay into him, and I finally got him down. Yeah, that was pretty much a raid boss for me. When sometimes you can sneak up on enemies and either use a backstab or a charge attack to kill them instantaneously. This is especially fun with greatswords because the damage does scale off of your weapon DPS. Now, No Rest for the Wicked has very limited fast travel. You can go from a Cerim Whisper to the City of Sacrament and back. That's it. However, each zone is quite small. You can actually traverse them very easily in under a minute. But they feel massive, especially when you're exploring them for the first time. Because what a zone lacks in horizontal space, it makes up for in vertical space. You'll very often start towards the bottom of a zone, then work your way up to the middle level, and finally end at the top level, each time finding new foes to defeat and new secrets to explore. In that sense, you can almost think of each area as a puzzle. For example, once you reach the quarry, you'll open the gates and enter it, and there'll be a locked gate. And you have to figure out how to use the cranes in the area to unlock that gate. Doing so will take you from the very bottom layer where you first fought foes, through the middle layer, and all the way up to the very top layer. Furthermore, this is very much a game which rewards exploration and taking your time. Whether it's climbing those vines that don't seem to have any purpose to find some extra resources, or it's just looking behind a wall and finding a dead guy with a treasure chest. Moon Studios has done a wonderful job of bringing the joy of exploration to the world of an ARPG. Because you can always go off a beaten track and there's something to discover there. You will find a treasure chest with loot that could very well be relevant. You'll find resources to harvest, something that you'll absolutely need to rebuild the City of Sacrament or replenish your food stocks. Or maybe you'll just find a really dangerous enemy that sends you back to the nearest Cerim Whisper. But regardless of what you find, you feel rewarded for your time, which I think is because as a single-player story-driven game, you're not feeling like you have to rush to Endgame. There's no live service waiting for you at the end, with infinite gameplay and a competitive leaderboard and all that stuff. It's about the journey, not the destination. And as you solve those puzzles, you'll also unlock shortcuts, which makes retraversing zones easier. But do keep in mind, it might be a little different when you return, because enemy respawns are not always going to be the same enemies in the same places. There's an element of randomization there. The game also has some light platforming elements. Luckily, you don't have to hold down a button and jump at exactly the right time, hold it down for the right length to get the perfect angle. This is way simpler. You just run towards an edge and your character automatically jumps. And you use this to get up on ledges, jump across areas, and otherwise solve the environmental puzzles. Unfortunately, some of the context-based stuff can be a little bit temperamental, and sometimes it looks like there's something that you were intended to do by the developers when that's really not the case. A good example is here, where I'm trying to jump across and get onto this little roof bit, and I keep falling and failing. And it's super frustrating, except for the fact that there's a really easy solution to this puzzle. Just climb up the narrow ledge over to the side, which I wasn't looking at, because some of the context-based clues in the level design made me think I was supposed to jump, 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 rather than jump, jump, climb. But hey, I guess the alternative is obnoxious and bright yellow paint strips on everything, so I'll take it even if it means sometimes I spend a good 10 minutes wondering why the devs made such an impossible challenge, only to realize that I was an idiot and I should have gone the other way. Though I do wish that I wouldn't fall to my death when trying to go down a ladder so much. Hopefully that's improved in the future. Now, as you explore, you come across a lot of resources. Copper, iron, or silver ore, various woods, fish, wildlife that you can slay for food and leather, and all sorts of things that you use to craft weapons, armor, and food. And overall, this system's really cool. It takes some survival game elements and mixes them into the ARPG. In addition to using these things to make stuff that directly increases your character power, you also use them to rebuild the City of Sacrament. As you upgrade buildings, vendors will have more resources, they'll unlock new recipes, higher level gear, and additional services. But unfortunately, upgrading the City of Sacrament is pretty resource intensive, and it honestly got pretty tedious to farm for, especially the clay. So I'd like to see more sources of clay in the future. Who knows, maybe Act 2 is a poison swamp that's absolutely full of clay. Thinking about it a little bit, that'd be pretty unique. I don't think we've seen a poison swamp in any Souls-like game before. But after that, it's time to head down to Fillmore's Smithy, or Eleanor's Enchanting Shop. Fillmore's Smithy, you'll be able to do a couple things. You can repair all of your gear, so come back here every time after you die. Or at least after you've died a few times. Additionally, you can upgrade items. Each item has 3 upgrade levels and 3 tiers. So you go upgrade level 1, 2, 3, then tier 2, then upgrade level 1, 2, 3, then tier 3, then upgrade level 1, 2, 3. As they increase in upgrade level and tier, items gain stats, which allows you to proceed into the endgame with significantly better scaling. On weapons, the base damage increases, on armor, the armor increases. Their stats do not change though. If you want to change the stats, you'll have to head over to Eleanor's. Here, you can do several things to your items. Number 1, you can extract runes, destroying the object, or 2, you can socket runes, adding a new special move to unleash when your focus reaches full. 2, you can infuse gems into your items, increasing the stats or offering special bonuses. And 3, you gain access to enchanting. You enchant a white item, to remove some of the customizability and add random stats. A lot of the most powerful items in the game are the purple cursed items, or blue items that you've enchanted yourself after rolling it like 5 times and not getting what you want. It's definitely a little bit random. However, items dropped plentifully enough that I didn't feel like it was super oppressive or anything. I didn't get too many things that were exactly what I wanted, but there were several that I said, alright, close enough, I'm pretty happy to use this. No Rest for the Wicked has a ton of potential, and Moon Studios made a bold decision to blend genres in a way that I really haven't seen before. So often, I've heard a developer say we're going to revolutionize the genre, but very rarely does a game feel truly revolutionary while I'm playing it, and No Rest for the Wicked absolutely feels revolutionary. But it's definitely not perfect. So here are a few of the major issues, frustrations, and sticking points that I personally encountered. Now, number 1, I could not try this game on keyboard and mouse, because I'm left-handed. I use the mouse with my left hand, and so with no option for custom keybinds, I simply don't have a way to grow a finger on the other side of my hand to use the controls. I've used a controller, it's been totally fine, but this needs to change ASAP. A game should not be releasing into early access or honestly even beta without the option to customize keybinds. Number 2, performance has been hit or miss throughout the entire experience. When I did my day 1 first impressions, performance was exceedingly poor. I basically locked up my entire machine just by setting the graphics to high by mistake. Now since then, each hotfix has brought performance improvements. But there are still times when on a 3080 and i7-12700K I am getting frame drops. Most of the time it's just within cities or transitioning between zones, so it doesn't really affect the gameplay. When the world is so beautiful, when the environmental effects are so nice, and when those are the times that you should just be lost in the world and the environment, it's really unfortunate to see that stuttering and see those frame drops. Beyond that, there's a few things that are a little bit more gameplay focused. Number 1, I want to collect a lot of stuff, and when I do, I quickly find my inventory gets full. Now, early on, you get a community chest, and after you complete of Rats and Raiders, you will have a house that you can pretty much stuff full of chests. But if I'm fitting a chest into every square inch of space in my house, maybe that's a problem. Maybe things should stack a little bit higher, or maybe there should be some way to store way more stuff in my inventory so that I can collect additional sets of weapons and armor to try things. Except I can't really try a lot of the things that I find either, which leads me to the second major gameplay problem that I've experienced in No Rest for the Wicked. Let's say I find a really cool new sword, or a dagger, or a bow, or anything that's not actually using the stats of my main build. I'm playing a strength build, so I get to use sword and board stuff, but I wanted to try a sword that has an int requirement. I can't equip it. I need to get the attribute requirement to equip it at all, which is a problem in a game that has no respecs. I understand that the developer wants you to stick with your choices, and I'm not saying that I should just be able to put on that sword that requires 42 int and have it be just as effective as my current weapon. What I'm saying is, if I just want to see what does the rune do, what are the animations, I shouldn't have to make a second character just to test that. In Dark Souls, for example, I can put on a weapon even if I don't have a proficiency for it. It will not be effective in combat, but I get to try it out, feel the weapon out, and decide, okay, this is something that is worth my time. This is something worth investing in. Maybe I want to re-level another character, maybe I want to respec, but I've at least got to try the weapon. And especially being able to try runes would be super valuable. Because remember, one of the coolest things about runes is you can take it from the item that you can't equip and potentially put it on your current weapon, assuming the rune is compatible, i.e. one hand to one hand, two hand to two hand, or a rune that's just general use. The third combat-related problem that I had is learning parry timings is a slow and painful process even in comparison to Souls games, because some attacks are much faster, making them incredibly difficult to parry, but there isn't an obvious tell to say, hey, this isn't something you should be able to parry, don't try. Having just a little sound effect or a slight glow on the enemy's weapon to know, okay, this is the thing you shouldn't try to parry, everything else is fine, would really be a good idea. Now, I'm sure experts don't run into this issue, but as someone who's not particularly good at these kinds of games, despite enjoying them a lot, I do think this is something needed. It doesn't have to be super obvious, it doesn't have to ruin the immersion, even just a slight chime sound on attacks you're not supposed to try to parry so that you know to dodge or block would be very welcome. And in fact, blocking kind of has this. On things that you're not supposed to block, you get knocked down, you get staggered for a short bit. Whereas on things you are supposed to block, it harmlessly deflects off and the enemy gets staggered for a fraction of a second, giving you an opening to attack. This is something that makes it very easy to learn when you should be blocking and when you should be dodging while using a shield. Then last up, this brings me to the Cerim Crucible, an endgame activity. And even the very concept of an endgame activity feels a little bit alien for the game's current state. Now, I'm sure part of that is just a side effect of the game being in early access, of only having access to Chapter 1. But even that aside, the Cerim Crucible itself has some problems. The first of which is you'll probably beat Act 1 around level 12, and the Cerim Crucible is tuned to be around level 20, which means you're going to get absolutely destroyed unless you're quite skillful, in a way that just isn't all that fun because you need to spend a significant amount of time farming up levels to equip the tier 3 gear that's going to give you the stat boost, or dying over and over again in the Cerim Crucible to get the materials that you need to enhance your currently existing gear up to tier 3. And all of these things are easily addressed when you enter the Cerim Crucible at a higher level, just naturally because you progress through Chapter 2 or Chapter 3, then it's no problem at all. But before, the developer said they want the Cerim Crucible to feel like a roguelike, to have that innate replayability of going through different zones with randomization. And right now, it's 6 rooms, the enemies are kind of randomized, but it's the same general sorts of enemies in each, ending with a boss, the powerful and dangerous Echo Knight. Here's a problem. In presenting this randomized layout, it fails to capture the soul of a roguelike, because the soul of a roguelike is not that the enemies are randomized, it's that you are randomized. If I could go into the Cerim Crucible and every time, right at the beginning, I found a weapon and a set of armor, I then got to enhance that weapon and set of armor, I got to find runes as I progressed, then it would very much do a good job of capturing the magic of a roguelike. In fact, in a lot of ways its very existence flies in the face of the rest of the experience, because No Rest for the Wicked is refreshingly story-driven, single-player, and exploration-focused. But there is no exploration in the Cerim Crucible. You simply kill every enemy on the floor to advance to the next. And there's no story in the Cerim Crucible. I kind of wish there was. But you're just fighting a whole bunch of dead Cerim because you've run out of things to do in the game, and instead of starting a new game plus or playing a different character, you've decided to make big number go bigger. At the end of the day, is this the worst thing in the world? No, it's not the worst thing in the world. It definitely doesn't ruin the game, and if anything, I think it's going to be an optional experience for people who are really bored of everything else the game has to offer. But because No Rest for the Wicked has done everything else so well, it kind of stands out like a sore thumb, at least at the moment. With that said, Moon Studios has done a wonderful job so far addressing player feedback, so I'm sure there's going to be improvements to the Cerim Crucible in the near future. And so now it's time for the verdict. Just based on my own personal experiences, I would absolutely recommend No Rest for the Wicked. However, because it is an early access title, I do have to add 2 caveats. Number 1, in regards to performance, if you're on an older machine or you're playing on a handheld, you might want to hold off until there's better optimization. And number 2, if you rely on custom keybinds or just want to play on keyboard and mouse, maybe hold off until keybind customization is added. When it comes to early access, I always say, buy a game for what it is now, not what it one day may be. And even what No Rest for the Wicked is now is absolutely wonderful. It's such a refreshing change of pace in a landscape where every new ARPG has to be a live service. It has to come out with something every 3 months. And of course, to sustain this utterly unsustainable development cycle, it has to add additional monetization. In comparison to that desperate and vapid attempt to make a forever game, it's wonderful to see something where the developers are prioritizing the experience, prioritizing getting lost in the world, and making sure that you are able to truly enjoy it even if you only play through No Rest for the Wicked once. Now with that said, it is very much more Souls than ARPG, while still hitting a middle ground between both of them. Now in comparison to Dark Souls, I would say there's more of an ARPG-ish power fantasy, where your gear and your build comes together and you feel yourself getting stronger. You're able to take down enemies in a couple of hits, which before took a little bit longer. However, you will still encounter things that feel like a wall, that force you to slow down, stop, and carefully consider. From my experience, No Rest for the Wicked is a lot easier than a Souls game, but it's a lot harder than your average ARPG. And bringing in the survival elements could be a nice change of pace, or could add some unwanted tedium, depending on how you play your games. If you just want to go kill enemies, kill more enemies, kill more enemies, this really isn't that kind of game. On the other hand, if you like getting sidetracked, you like getting distracted by harvesting stuff, and you don't mind farming a little bit, then you're gonna have a really good time. In fact, it's dangerously good to a point where you might lose 30 or 40 hours before you know it. The game is doing awesome stuff by blending 2 different genres, both of which I enjoy, into something that I absolutely love. It is far from perfect, and it's going to change a lot as development continues. But Moon Studios has already been very active. There's been 5 hotfixes in the first week. They brought significant balance changes, new shields, quality of life improvements, and performance fixes. Even now, just 7 days after early access dropped, the game feels a lot better to play than it did on day 1. So while I very much recommend that you buy it for what it is right now, not what it may someday be, I'm very excited for the future of No Rest for the Wicked. A lot of games promise they're going to revolutionize a genre, and don't have much to show for it. But Moon Studios is actually putting their game where their mouth is. They're changing ARPGs. And very much in the same way that Ori and the Blind Forest became a new standard for platformers, I hope that No Rest for the Wicked becomes a new standard for ARPGs. Because honestly, I enjoy this a lot more than games that copied all of Diablo 2's flaws just because Diablo 2 sold really well 20 years ago. But those are just my thoughts on the game so far. Have you tried No Rest for the Wicked yet? If so, what are your experiences? And if not, after watching this review, are you going to check the game out? And hey, if you've already played it and you don't really have too many experiences to share yet, just let me know your favorite ARPG or Souls-like below, because I'm always looking to try new games, and I'm especially looking to try more Souls-like games. And if you want a helping hand for your first steps on the Isle of Sakra, I've got a couple of guides for you. Number 1, my attributes guide will go over what the game's attributes do and how you should allocate them based on your playstyle. Then, take a look at my enchanting and upgrading guide to know how to make your gear better and when it's actually worth it. Oh, and if you get stuck on the prologue boss, Warwick the Torn, I've got a guide for that as well. So if you're looking for something else to watch after this, check any of those out up in the card and down below. Of course, before I go, I'd like to thank my patrons and channel members for the continued support. At the end of the day, being a full-time creator is far from a stable income. AdSense is up and down every month. And so having direct fan support makes it possible for me to make videos like this, for me to invest the 50 hours in a game I love and share that experience with you, regardless of whether the algorithm says this is a good thing to cover or this is a topic that the most people will enjoy. So if you want to see more reviews like this, then link to support is down below. And of course, thank you to everyone who watched to the end. Going into No Rest for the Wicked, I thought, oh, it's only Act 1, it should be pretty short. Turns out, the content itself was, but the game was so engrossing that I ended up spending way more time just messing around with different builds, playing through again, testing stuff, trying things, experiencing side quests and various other stories, and exploring all those little nooks and crannies to get those annoying chests that were just out of reach when I went through the area for the first time. So good luck when exploring the Isle of Sakra, and I'll see you in the next one.